So this week's Torah portion is Terumah. It's Exodus chapter 25 through almost to the end of chapter 27. And I want to read you just the first 8 verses, which I hope you'll agree are mind-bendingly inspiring. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli and other stones for setting, for the ephod and for the breastpiece. And let them make me a sanctuary, that I may dwell among them." So, who else thinks that this is the most inspiring thing they've heard in a long time? No? Well, maybe I should explain a little bit more about why I find this so incredibly exciting and inspiring. Why don't I start by backing up a bit? You always want to read Torah with some context. So what's the context here? We're a little over halfway through Exodus, the story of our Israelite ancestors being delivered from slavery under Pharaoh to freedom, worshiping Adonai. The Israelites have been out of Egypt for only a matter of weeks, a few months at the most. And they've come to the foot of Mount Sinai. God has descended over the top of the mountain in a big, fiery cloud, and Moses has gone up and down the mountain a few times to get instruction from God. At the very end of the last week's portion, Moses went back up the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights with the promise that when he comes back down, he'll be bringing the tablets of the pact with him, the 10 Commandments. So here we are, fresh out of slavery at the foot of Mount Sinai, waiting impatiently for God's commandments, the Torah, the teachings, which will form the basis of God's covenant with the Jewish people. Are you inspired yet? Well, let's dig a little deeper. I've said before that when you read our scriptures, it's all well and good to pay attention to what happens in the text. That's important for sure. But if you stop at the what, then you're really missing out. 3,500 years from now, no one's going to be reading the Mississauga News, or even the Globe and Mail, for that matter, to see what happened last week. 3,500 years after our ancestors stood at Sinai, it's still important for us to focus on the what. But we also have to move beyond that as well. Even more important than the what is the why. That's the real power of scriptures. The why is always important, relevant, and timeless, even if the what seems a little less immediately scrutable millennia later. Asking why is the first important step towards the ultimate question: so what am I going to do about it? Jewish tradition understands the importance of this immediacy. In our Passover liturgy, we make the liberation from slavery personal. When we retell the story of the Exodus, we say, "When God brought me out of bondage." Not my long-forgotten ancestors, me, each of us. So let's dig into the first several verses of this week's Torah portion, and let's focus on the why as we take in the what. God tells Moses to accept gifts from everyone whose heart so moves them. Why is God looking for gifts? Does God really need tchotchkes? What's more, these gifts that God is accepting, they're all pretty valuable. God's looking for expensive metals, rare dyes, semi-precious stones, and other riches. Before we even get to the why, some of you might be wondering, hey, where did a bunch of slaves get all this wealth that they could give it to God? You recall that in Exodus chapter 12, we read that as they were leaving Egypt, the Egyptians were so happy to see the former slaves go that they gave them all kinds of treasure to take with them on their way. Which brings us to our first really big why. Let's say you've been a slave all your life, and so were your parents and your grandparents and all of your ancestors back for more than 10 generations. You've never owned the clothes on your back, let alone gold, silver, and lapis lazuli. Only a couple of months ago, you came into riches like you've never imagined in your life. Now Moses is going to come to you and say, if you're so inclined, God would like all your stuff. The first stuff you've ever owned, the stuff you've only just gotten weeks before. Why would anyone in that situation be willing to give away their treasure? Let's think about it a bit more. In fact, let's put ourselves in the shoes of our ancestors and think about why we might be willing to give up our newfound riches. Remember, God brought us out of Egypt, not just our ancestors. So imagine you've been a slave all your life, but now you're free. If you think about it, that seems like a great thing, but it's also got to be pretty intimidating, maybe even scary. When you're a slave, your life is miserable, but it's also kind of uncomplicated. Now you're free, so you have power you've never had, but you've also got responsibility you've never had too. And it's something you've only had for the better part of a couple of months to come to grips with. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that there's any kind of silver lining to slavery. What I am saying is that there's nothing about a life of slavery that prepares you for a life of freedom. It's a steep learning curve, and as our ancestors stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, they hadn't been on it very long. In a situation with that kind of uncertainty, you've got to be thinking, wait a minute, how am I going to take care of myself? How am I going to get food and clothing and shelter? You've got some valuables you picked up on your way out of Egypt. I imagine you're going to be thinking that these valuables are your insurance policy. If you found yourself in that situation, would you readily give up your safety net? It seems almost impossible to imagine. Why would our ancestors do it then? Let's put ourselves back in our ancestors' shoes just for a minute and ask them why. Sure, you find yourself in an intimidating, even frightening situation. At the same time, though, you know that you're right there with a front row seat to the fulfillment of a promise that Adonai made to our ancestor Abraham. God is about to reveal his covenant with the entire Jewish people. History is being made, and you're there making it personally. That's got to give you a real sense of excitement. And not just excitement, but gratitude. God tells you, we're going to do this together, but I need you to do your part. You're going to do it out of a sense of excitement and gratitude, profound gratitude. Something else that strikes me as really significant is that God isn't just asking for a bunch of expensive treasures. He's asking for people's talents and their time to put these treasures to use, building the ark and the tabernacle. God isn't just asking for donations of stuff. He wants people to use their skills and their time to help complete this important holy work. So that's my idea of why our Israelite ancestors were so excited and profoundly thankful that they'd give God their newfound stuff and their time and talents into the bargain. Let me ask you another why question, though. Why would any of us be any less excited or profoundly thankful right here, right now? After all, the world is still filled with literal and figurative slavery. The work God began with our ancestors at Sinai isn't finished. It's still going on, and God still needs us, the Jewish people, to do our part in this important holy work. You know, I think it's really important to get to know more about other cultures and other faith traditions. I think that we have so much to learn about and from each other. Sometimes seeing a different perspective on something can really open your eyes to an important insight. For example, I love that the Jewish word for charity is tzedakah, righteousness. We don't give charity because we want to be nice or generous. We do it because it's the right thing to do. At the same time, I think our Christian friends have much better language than us to describe supporting their houses of worship. While we talk about membership and dues, like the synagogue is some kind of social club that we join, Christians use the word stewardship. Stewardship. We often treat dealing with the financial needs of the synagogue like it's impolite or even crass. Christians incorporate the act of giving right into their liturgy by passing a collection plate in the middle of their services. They clearly and deliberately recognize that the act of supporting the needs of their community is an act of worship. It's holy work. And it's not like this is a uniquely Christian idea either. The Torah, this week's portion in fact, shows us that this is very much a Jewish idea. When you support Solel's material needs, it's not like when you pay your hydro bill. It's not mundane. It's not fee-for-service. You're doing God's work, holy work. When Christians use the word stewardship, they're acknowledging that whatever they have is a gift from God and that they owe God a debt of gratitude for those gifts. And again, they got this idea straight out of the Torah. So I ask you, what treasures do you have? What resources, what talents can you share to do God's holy work? We, each of us, have something to be thankful for. To be sure, some have more and many have less. Too many have much less. But still, everyone has something. Some skill, some talent, even just a little bit of spare time that they can give back to God to help in the holy work we started at Mount Sinai 3,500 years ago. There are Jewish traditions that will tell you that you should say at least 100 blessings each day. Taking a moment 100 times a day to reflect on what you have to be thankful for really does a lot to shape your perspective on the world. Economics teaches us that there's a multiplier effect, that when you use money, it grows into more money. The same is true of gratitude. The more you show your gratitude to God by engaging in gimilut chasadim and avodah, acts of loving kindness, and in holy works, the more there is for everyone to be thankful for. Chaim Potok wrote, and we quote in Solel's own prayer book, that we must fill life with meaning. How do we do that? By clearly acknowledging the giving of our time, our talents, and our treasure as the spiritual act of worship that it is. When we strengthen and support our community, when we reach out in peace and fellowship to other people of faith, when we welcome people who've lost or maybe never even had any particular faith, we're doing God's holy work. When you read this week's Torah portion, I hope that you'll feel the same excitement and the same profound sense of gratitude that our ancestors felt, and that these feelings inspire you to continue the holy work we all began at the foot of Mount Sinai. Shabbat Shalom.